أكبر الله أكبر.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Inshallah, today we're going to be speaking about the month of Jumada Al-Akhira. And today is the 3rd of Jumada Al-Akhira, and it comes after Jumada Al-Ula. And of course the next month after Jumada Al-Ula is the month of Rajab, and then Sha'ban. Then we're going to be witnessing the blessed month of Ramadan by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we spoke about Jumada Al-Ula last month when the month came in, and we mentioned that there are no specific ahadith that speak about the virtues of the month of Jumada Al-Ula, and the same is the case for the month of Jumada Al-Akhira. And we also spoke about the meaning of the word Jumada and why this month has been given this name. And we said that in the days of Jahiliyyah before Islam, this name was given to this month, and they also had other names for the months that the word that they would use, the tribe. Sometimes they would use different names depending on the tribe or the custom, whatever the case may be. And Jumada was used because at one point in time, when this month would occur, it would be winter. And the word Jumada refers to something becoming solid as a result of being very cold, meaning something freezing up. Water becoming like ice or freezing up as a result of the weather. And so because of this, they called the month Jumada, because water would become solid. And this is the origin of why this month is called Jumada. And of course, the seasons change in the Islamic calendar. You know, Ramadan, sometimes it will be in the summer, eventually it will go into the winter, then it will go back into the summer. So why did this name continue even though seasons change? Well, we mentioned also before that sometimes months are given certain names due to something which happened during that time, in that season. And then even though the month comes out of that season, the name just ends up sticking. The name just sticks, and then people just end up using the same name for that month. Otherwise, you know, you'd have like 12 different or 10 different names for that month based on the season. And names would just stick for whatever reason. And so that name stuck, and this was the name that was used after the fact. So Jumada Al-Ula is the first month, and Jumada Al-Akhira is the second month. And we don't say Akhir, we say Jumada Al-Akhira. Why do we say Jumada Al-Akhira? In fact, before this, the first month is Jumada Al-Ula, and we don't say Jumada Al-Awwal. Why don't we say Jumada Al-Awwal in the Arabic language? Anyone have any ideas? The difference between Al-Awwal and Ula.
Feminine.
Very good. Feminine and masculine. So some languages have feminine words, masculine words. The word Jumada is a feminine word. So, as Allah says, وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى, because it's referring to something feminine. Ula is for feminine. Awwal, of course, is for masculine, because everything in the Arabic language is either masculine or feminine. That's why in the Quran Allah describes himself as Al-Awwal, because the word Allah is a masculine word. Obviously we don't associate Allah with genders, because Allah Azza wa Jalla is the one who created gender, He created human beings, He created the male and the female. The word itself, Allah, the Lafzul Jalala, is a word which refers to the masculine. And so a feminine word in the Arabic language would be a word that ends with ta, the ta marbuta, if some of you are familiar with this. That's why we say ula, we don't say awwal. The same is the case for Jumada Al-Akhira. Jumada Al-Akhir is used for masculine. Al-Akhir, without the ta at the end. Al-Akhira is used when you're referring to something feminine. And so you say Jumada Al-Akhira in this case. Also, some say Jumada Thani. Some people say Jumada Thani and not Jumada Al-Akhira. And the scholars, they say, at the end of the day, there's no real problem with saying Jumada Al-Akhira and Jumada Thaniya. It doesn't really make a difference. They would say Jumada Thaniya, not Jumada Thani, for the same reason. Thaniya is referring to feminine. So they would say Jumada Al-Ula and Jumada Thaniya. And some say Jumada Al-Ula and Jumada Al-Akhira. And the scholars, they say there's no real issue with saying either one, but they say the first may be better, to say Al-Akhira. which is what I mentioned, Jumada Al-Akhira. Why? They say because when you say Al-Ula, then you say Al-Thaniya, people may think there's a Thalitha, a third, and Rabi'a, and Khamisa, and Sadisa. Whereas if you say Ula, and then you say Akhira, Akhira means the last. Akhira means the last. Ula means the first. There's no hinting at a possibility of there being a third or a fourth or a fifth. So you say Jumada Al-Ula, Jumada Al-Akhira. I think we mentioned this before when we spoke about Rabi' Al-Awwal. Rabi' Al-Awwal, Rabi' Al-Akhir. Rabi' Al-Awwal, some say Rabi' Al-Thani. Again, it's not like something which is in the Sharia of Islam. It's a linguistic thing. And so there's no harm in using either. But they say it might be better for a person, it might be more accurate for a person to say Jumada Al-Akhira as opposed to Jumada Al-Thaniya. But there's no difference either way. Inshallah, both are permissible, both are fine. So, as we said, there are no specific incidents which took place, there are no specific virtues of the month of Jumada Al-Akhira. Just as we mentioned in the previous month, Jumada Al-Ula, the same thing. There are no specific virtues of both of these months, Jumada Al-Ula and Jumada Al-Akhira. We did mention some of the incidents which occurred in Jumada Al-Ula. When we spoke about Jumada Al-Ula last month, we spoke about some of those events which took place in this month, the month of Jumada Al-Ula, or last month, in the month of Jumada Al-Ula, it's Jumada Al-Thaniya now. We spoke about the prayer of fear that was legislated in the battle of Dhat al-Salasil, which took place in the month of Jumada Al-Ula. This is last month. The man who attempted to kill the Prophet ﷺ, the battle of Mu'tah, Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu, being chosen to be the leader of the Muslims at the battle of Mu'tah. He was the one who took charge after the other companions were killed. And we mentioned some other incidents also. Inshallah, today what we're going to do, as we said, there are no specific virtues related to this month, but there are a few incidents which occurred. And of course, if you go back, 14 centuries, there's 14 centuries of Islam, there are many instances or incidents which took place in Islamic history related to Islam and the Muslims. But I wanted to go through some of them, things which we'll be able to understand within the context. Sometimes if you mention something that happened in Islamic history, you'd have to mention other details which may be time consuming, especially if you don't understand the context of those incidents. And there's around 6 incidents which I wanted to focus on today and speak about. And these are going back from the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, continuing into the time of Umar ibn Khattab, and referring to some of the other companions of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And there's lessons we can take from them, inshallah. And so the aim is to go through some of these stories, 6 of them, and to look at what incidents actually took place. From those incidents is the death of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu was the leader of the Muslims for 2 years, and he was somebody who was chosen by the companions to be the leader of the Muslims. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he passed away at the age of 63 years old, 10 years after the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ from Mecca to Medina, he passed away. Nobody was explicitly chosen to be the leader of the Muslims after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. And initially, there was discussions about who was going to be the leader after the Prophet ﷺ passed away. There was no one who was actually chosen immediately. It took a number of days, I think maybe even a week or more than a week possibly, before they chose Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. To the extent that when the Prophet ﷺ passed away and they had to pray the janazah prayer, there was a problem. There was an issue. What was the issue? Who was going to lead? Because in those days, whoever led, and this was the tradition, in fact it was a tradition amongst Muslim countries up until the Khilafah ended, as far as I know, the leader of the Muslims would be the one who would lead the Salah, especially at the time of the Khulafa. Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali radiallahu anh, and those who used to come after, even after that, for centuries, the leader of the Muslims would be the one who would do the khutbah on a Friday in the main masjid, and he would lead the Salah. Now, if you're chosen as the Imam, that's a sign that you should be the leader, basically. Because the Prophet ﷺ before them was the Imam. He was their leader. And so whoever was going to be the leader, or whoever was going to be the Imam, would be the leader. You're assuming that he's going to be the leader because he's the Imam of the Salah. So, that was a problem, because whoever they put forward, it would assume that he's the best person to be the Imam, and if he's the best person to be the Imam, he's the best person to lead the Muslims. And so they were worried about what to do in those circumstances when no leader had been chosen, that they decided to bring batches of companions and for them to pray Salat al-Janazah separately instead of praying the Salat al-Janazah as a group, continuous, like as a group with everyone together. So instead, they had batches coming. And the companions were still coming. Many companions were not in Medina, of course, in those days. Islam had spread. And so people would come. And whenever they would come, they would offer the Janazah prayer. So there wasn't one specific Imam who led the Janazah prayer for the Prophet ﷺ. And this is one of the reasons. So what actually happened? The Prophet ﷺ, he passed away. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh heard about the Ansar deciding who was going to be the leader amongst themselves. And the Prophet ﷺ has passed away. The Ansar were the ones who invited the Prophet ﷺ to live in Medina. And so it's understandable. Like, imagine somebody comes from another city and lives here, and he was the leader. The land where he lived, you would assume, especially in those days, it's a different time, you would assume that the person who would be the next leader would be somebody from the land itself. Especially if you're thinking about somebody who comes from another country and lives in another country, and he maybe was a leader, he passes away. Somebody who is a native of that land, it would make sense for him to be the leader. And so they assumed that the leader would be from the Ansar, from someone from Medina. And so Abu Bakr radiallahu anh went to the meeting along with Umar radiallahu anh and Abu Ubaidah Amr ibn Jarrah, two of the companions. And so they both went along with Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, and they were involved in the meeting. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh said, I would advise you to choose one of these two people to be the leader. And so Umar radiallahu anh, he thought to himself, why are we not thinking or considering Abu Bakr for the position? It makes more sense. And it's very interesting, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, as a result of his humility, didn't put himself forward. He didn't think, maybe I should be the leader, I think I'm the most suitable person. And even if he had said this, it wouldn't have been an issue. People would have understood. It would make sense. But it just shows his humility. He wasn't willing. He didn't want to. Why didn't he want to? Because being a leader is a huge responsibility. You're responsible for so much. And so Abu Bakr radiallahu anh offered two people to be the leader of the Muslims. And Umar radiallahu anh said, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh has more right. And so straight away Umar radiallahu anh pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, there and then. And that basically tradition followed with regards to the other companions. They all copied Umar radiallahu anh, and they all pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, and he was a leader for two years roughly. And he laid the foundations for the Khilafah of those who came after. He was the one who laid the foundations, had organized everything in terms of the governance of the Muslim state, of the empire of the Muslims. And Umar ibn Khattab later, when Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was sick, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh chose Umar ibn Khattab to be the leader of the Muslims. So it was different to Abu Bakr's appointment, if you like. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh wasn't explicitly chosen by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Of course, there are many evidences, many ahadith, many things which are mentioned about why he was the suitable person to be the Khalifa of the Prophet ﷺ. He's the greatest companion. That's something which is clear. He's mentioned in the Quran as a companion. When the Prophet said to his companion in the cave, "La tahzan inna Allah ma'ana," don't be afraid, Allah is with us. Many other things. When the Prophet ﷺ was sick, he commanded Abu Bakr radiallahu anh to lead the salah while he was sick, just before he passed away. Again, another sign. The one who's leading the salah, he's like the leader, and he's making Abu Bakr radiallahu anh as his deputy. And also many hadith. What do we hear from the companions? I saw the Prophet ﷺ with Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. I saw the Prophet ﷺ came with Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. So you always have both of them together. Of course, he was one of the earliest people to accept Islam, if not the earliest person from the men. And he was somebody who was a very close friend of the Prophet ﷺ before and after Islam. So when Abu Bakr radiallahu anh dies, he specifically chooses Umar ibn Khattab. And Umar ibn Khattab became the leader for around 10 years. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he passed away in Jumada Al-Akhira in the 13th year of the Hijrah. In the 13th year of the Hijrah. So he became the leader towards the end of the 10th year of the Hijrah, and he was roughly the leader for about 2 years. Even though it was only 2 years, so much happened. He conquered so much land during his time. And like we said, he built the foundations of the Muslim empire. You know, all the legal systems and all the foundations that were necessary before you're able to build on top of this. Foundations are very important, and Umar radiallahu anh benefited from this. And as we said, he passed away in the 13th year of the Hijrah, and he was 63 years old. How old was the Prophet ﷺ when he passed away? 63 years old as well, roughly. And Umar radiallahu anh, 63 years old also. So they all passed away at the same age. So Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh was chosen to be the leader of the Muslims in Jumada Al-Akhira also. Because of course, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh passes away in Jumada Al-Akhira, 13 Hijri, and Umar ibn Khattab, this is like a second point, the second incident, which is that the people gave bay'ah to Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh after they were told by Abu Bakr radiallahu anh that Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh is going to be the leader of the Muslims. So Umar ibn Khattab also in Jumada Al-Akhira becomes the leader of the Muslims. And another incident is mentioned which also occurred in Jumada Al-Akhira. Some of the historians and scholars, they say بعد توليه الخلافة بخمسة أيام. After he became the Khalifa, 5 days after he becomes the leader, they even mentioned the 26th. So 21st of Jumada Al-Akhira, Umar ibn Khattab becomes the leader after Abu Bakr radiallahu anh passes away. So he passes away 21st of Jumada Al-Akhira, 13 Hijri. Umar ibn Khattab on the 26th of Jumada Al-Akhira, so 5 days later, he removes Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh from being the leader of the Muslim army. And he appoints Abu Ubaidah Amir al-Jarrah as the leader of the Muslims. And questions are asked about why this was. Umar ibn Khattab, he would say that I don't want people thinking that Muslims are victorious just because they have Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh as their leader. And it's like, for example, if you can put it in modern terms, if you have a football team, and I mean now he's probably too old, but let's say Ronaldo was in a team. People would assume, khalas, that's it. We've got Ronaldo, we've got Messi, we've got Mbappe, whoever it is. He's in our team. That means we're going to win. We're going to win, that's it. And they do start winning. They win every single match. You know, 10 games go by, they win every single match, he's playing. All of a sudden he gets injured. What is everyone going to think? We're going to lose. Why are they going to lose? He's not playing, so we're going to lose. It affects them, you know, mentally. They think that they're not going to win anymore. They think that the only reason why they win is because of one person. So you could assume that the same logic was being used by Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh. People would assume that they were winning just because of Khalid ibn Walid, when that wasn't the case. It was because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Victory comes from Allah azza wa jal. And of course, he is Saifullah, he has his legendary status, he has his position amongst Islam and the Muslims and amongst the companions and the Muslims at the time. And of course, he is who he is. And Umar ibn Khattab, he decides to appoint Abu Ubaidah Amir al-Jarrah as the leader of the Muslims. It's also said in some incidents in the time of Khalid ibn Walid that he made some errors, he made some mistakes. And so Umar ibn Khattab didn't want him to be the leader of the army at the time. Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah is chosen. Interestingly, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, he has a meeting and he says to them, I have been chosen to be the leader of the army. However, if you're okay, then I still want to have him as my aide. I don't want to make any decisions until I've spoken to Khalid ibn Walid. Basically, unofficially, he's still in charge. And do you agree and are you happy with this? And they said, yeah, we're fine with this. This is a good idea. So interestingly, and again, subhanAllah, this shows us Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah's humility, his understanding. It wouldn't make sense for him just to be a general, soldier in the ranks and not be involved when it comes to strategy and the tactics of warfare, and for him to be somebody to have as an advisor. And so he says, essentially, whatever Khalid Walid says, that's what we'll do. So really nothing changed in terms of his status, in terms of his position, in terms of his input, in terms of what the army would actually do. And this shows us the status of Khalid Walid radiallahu anhu. It also shows us the status of Abu Ubaidah Amir ibn Jarrah also. And another interesting lesson we learn from this is, of course, there are going to be instances and cases where companions will have differing with one another, and they won't agree on certain things, and maybe they don't necessarily get on. Maybe they have arguments with one another. We've had, there are many narrations of companions who quarreled with each other. But it was about how they dealt with it and how they were amongst themselves. They were never unjust to one another. And if they were, they would reconcile. We know about Umar ibn Khattab arguing with Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, many cases. But it was never to the extent where it caused animosity and hatred and divisions amongst the Muslims. Other stories as well, of Abu Dhar al-Ghifari insulting Bilal ibn Rabah radiallahu anhu, two great esteemed companions. They would have quarrels, there was a conflict between them. But this is human nature. Like, you're going to have people quarreling with other people. I mean, even us, we have friends, we have close friends that we know, people who are in the masjid or people who are close to us, maybe family ties, maybe just close friends that we have, and we get into arguments with them. It's a normal thing. It's part of life. A person's not going to 100% agree with somebody else. There's going to be differences, there's going to be conflict, you're going to disagree with people who are the closest to you. But you can see in these kinds of instances, it would never disunite the ummah. Whereas this is something that you see many times in many parts of the world when it comes to non-Muslims and even Muslims nowadays, where a disagreement could lead them to leaving the main body of Muslims, for example. Or a general disagrees with the leader removes him, the general ends up going against the leader himself. And this even happened in Islamic history, like way after the original Khilafah of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. But these kinds of things were as a result of the selfishness of people, it was as a result of greed, as a result of competing with one another, and it would cause disunity, and of course shaitan would get involved. But the point is here that unity is from the most essential parts of why the Muslim community remains strong. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us united once again, especially as a result of what's happening around the world. May Allah make the affairs of the Muslims all over the world easy, and ease the affairs of the Muslims in Gaza also. So the point is here that the leader of the Muslims, Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, removed Khalid Walid from the position, and he appointed Abu Ubaidah Amir ibn Jarrah as the leader of the Muslim army. Another interesting thing is that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when he was the leader of the Muslims, people called him Khalifatu Rasulillah, which means the successor of the Messenger of Allah. Khalifatu Rasulillah. And Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he became the leader, they initially would call him Khalifati Rasulillah, the successor of the Prophet ﷺ, of the Messenger of Allah, because he is the successor of Abu Bakr, and Abu Bakr is the successor of the Prophet ﷺ. So it's said that people came to Umar ibn Khattab from the Muslim lands that was conquered, and there were Muslims there now. They came to him and they called him Amir al-Mu'mineen. And he asked him, he said, what is this, like, where did you get this title from? And they said, oh, this is what we call you. Where we're from, we call you Amir al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers. And Umar ibn Khattab, he liked this title. He liked the idea of using this title as opposed to Khalifatu Rasulillah. Because, if he passes away and the next leader comes, it's going to be Khalifatu Rasulillah. And when he dies, the next person who comes, it's going to be 4 times Khalifatu. And then, 100 leaders later, it's going to go on for like 100 times. So Umar ibn Khattab liked this title, and that's the title that's still used, until the Muslim empire fell. It was a title that was commonly used, Amir al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers. It was something which was started or initiated by Umar ibn Khattab when some of the Muslims came and they gave this title to Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. They called him by this title, and he decided to adopt it, and that's what was used after Umar ibn Khattab passed away. amongst Uthman and Ali radiallahu anhu, and those leaders who came after them, alayhim afdalu salatu wassalam. Also, from the incidents which took place, is on the 20th of Jumada Al-Akhira, which was a Wednesday. Wednesday, the 20th of Jumada Al-Akhira, in the 17th year of the Hijrah. So who is the leader of the Muslims? Still Umar ibn Khattab. He became the leader when he was in the year 13 Hijri. 13 Hijri he becomes the leader. He's the leader for approximately 10 years. So this is 17 Hijri. 17 Hijri. Wednesday, Jumada Al-Akhira, the 20th of Jumada Al-Akhira. The Islamic calendar is made official in terms of the months, in terms of when the Islamic calendar is going to start from, which year, and which month is going to start from. So that was done in the time of Umar ibn Khattab on Wednesday, the 20th of Jumada Al-Akhira, 17 Hijri. And why was this done? We mentioned this at the beginning when we spoke about this series in the first lesson, when we talked about how the calendar was initiated, how it began. There was no Islamic calendar in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. They would have months, but the Arabs, they would move months around. They would swap months because they wanted to fight, and some months are sacred months where you don't fight, and the sacred month would come, they would say, no, let's swap it with another month so we can fight. This was a common, believe it or not, they would change months around. Like it's what month is it now? What month is it now? December. Of course it's December. Let's say, for example, you're not allowed to fight in December. For example, they would say, okay, let's make it January. 16th of January. And then we can fight. Because it's allowed to fight in January, for example. And then when December would end, but they've changed it to January, they would say, okay, next month is going to be December. And then it will be February, March, just like normal. This was a common thing amongst the Arabs. The point is, they never gave lots of importance to an actual calendar. The Romans had their calendar, the Persians had their own system, the Muslims didn't have this. In the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, they never had any calendar. Like dates. A letter was written, there was no date on the letter. So it's something maybe for us, it's like, doesn't make any sense. Dates are critical for us. In those days, it wasn't something which was done. Umar radiallahu anhu, a few incidents happened. One incident is that's mentioned by the scholars. They say that a man came complaining. He said, this man, okay, we had a contract that he was supposed to pay me. He was supposed to pay me in this month. Okay, the month of Sha'ban, for example. He was supposed to pay me in this month. And I have a contract written proving he was supposed to pay me in this month. Umar ibn Khattab looks at the contract, and indeed it says Sha'ban. And so he says, which Sha'ban did you mean? He says, this Sha'ban, this year. He says, it's not written. You didn't say which Sha'ban. Sha'ban of this year, Sha'ban of last year, Sha'ban of next year. How are we supposed to know? And so Umar ibn Khattab realized we need to have some kind of date system so that we can have a proper calendar. Another story is mentioned of one of the generals who was commanding the Muslim army. Umar radiallahu anhu sent him a letter. And then things changed. A number of days later, he sent him another letter, 2 letters. And they both happened to arrive at the same time to the general. The general now sees both letters and can't make out which orders to follow. Okay, who knows what happened? Maybe the messenger dropped them off and went back. Maybe it was given to somebody else who gave it to the Muslim general. So he looks at the letters and there's no date. One says do one thing, another says do another thing. Now if you know the date, you know that the latest letter, that's the orders you follow. So he sent the letter back. And he said, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, 2 letters came from you. I don't know which letter came first and which letter came after, so I don't know which order you want me to fulfill. How am I supposed to know which one to do? So Umar ibn Khattab gathered the companions together. And he asked them, what should we do? We need an Islamic calendar. But which year shall we start from? And it said that Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anh, he gave the suggestion that the Hijrah should be the year that we start the Islamic calendar. Others mentioned, for example, the date of his birth, the month of the year of his birth. Others mentioned the year of his death. Others mentioned the conquest of Mecca, the first revelation, etc., etc. But the Hijrah was chosen. Why was the Hijrah chosen? Because that's when Islam flourished. That's the beginning of the Islamic empire. Medina is the first Islamic city. And so they chose the year of the Hijrah. That's why it's called Hijri. And then they were discussing which month will be the first month. And Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu said it should be the month of Muharram. Others said Ramadan. Ramadan would make sense. The best month of the year. Why not start with Ramadan? Or the month of Hajj. And others mentioned other months. Rabiul Awwal. People mentioned Rabiul Awwal. Why Rabiul Awwal? What happened to Rabiul Awwal? The Prophet ﷺ's birth. He was born in Rabiul Awwal, but he also died in Rabiul Awwal. So that was the issue. So they eventually agreed on Muharram. Why? Umar ibn Khattab, he said, لِمَنْ صَرِفِ النَّاسِ مِنْ حَجِّهِمْ, because people are now leaving after they've just performed Hajj. What does that have to do with anything? They're going back and they're hoping Allah has given them a new leaf. Allah has turned over for them a new page. They're starting a new life. It's like they're reborn. They don't have any sins. They're like, starting anew, a fresh beginning, a new year for them. As soon as they finish the Hajj in the month of Dhul Hijjah. And so Muharram is the month after Dhul Hijjah. And so Umar ibn Khattab said this is a good idea. We'll use the month of Muharram as the first month of the Islamic calendar. So this is how the Islamic calendar actually came about. In the time of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. So he initiated the year and he initiated which month the Islamic calendar will start from. And of course this has been the case from that time. And a calendar is a form of identity of a Muslim. It's how we identify. When a person, let's say the Chinese, they have their own calendar. They have the Chinese New Year, etc. When we hear about the Chinese New Year, we know it refers to specifically the Chinese. It's part of their culture, it's part of their identity. Likewise, when it comes to the Western calendar, when it comes to us, we should be aware. This is the whole point of these classes. It should make us aware of the Islamic calendar, so that we're at least familiar with the month. We're at least familiar with the year that we're in. Because it's part of our identity. Also, it helps us with our ibadah. Because when you know how far Ramadan is, or how close Dhul Hijjah is, or how close, for example, other months are which are important, the month of Muharram, for example, other months which have certain benefits, for example, fasting in the month of Dhul Hijjah, fasting in the month of Muharram, Ashura, etc. It helps us to prepare, it helps us to think of things from a different perspective, as opposed to the Western calendar. And also the Western calendar, as we've mentioned at the beginning, is full of, polytheistic kind of ideas. The Sunday is named after the god of the sun. Thursday is named after the god of Thor. These are all names of gods and Roman and Greek gods that were incorporated into the calendar when it comes to the days, when it comes to the months also. So the point being, it's important for us to know the Islamic calendar, and this was one of the legacies that was left behind by Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu in the 17th year of the Hijrah. Another thing which was mentioned that took place in Jumada Al-Akhira on a Friday after the Asr prayer in the 20th year of the Hijrah, again during the lifetime of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, Iskandariya was conquered by the Muslims. And this is a magnificent city, one of the main cities in which land? Which country? Where's Iskandariya?
Syria.
No? Alexandria. Where's Alexandria? Egypt. Egypt. Alexandria is Egypt. In Arabic they call it Iskandariya. Iskandariya was conquered, and it was conquered by Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu. And Amr ibn al-As has his own very interesting story. Amr ibn al-As, he conquered Alexandria, basically he conquered Egypt. Once you conquer the main city, the land is open for you. No one else is going to put up much of a fight. Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu was the general of the army which conquered Egypt basically. And he became the governor of Egypt. And he also became the governor of other lands later on. Amr ibn al-As, very interestingly, was the one who was sent by the Quraysh to bring the Muslims back from Abyssinia. You know the story of the Muslims going to Abyssinia. And Najashi speaking to the Muslims, speaking to the representatives of Quraysh. And they were trying to get Najashi to send them back. And the man from the Quraysh representatives, he said, "O Najashi, ask them what they say about your Lord Isa. They don't say about Isa what you believe." And that's when Ja'far radiallahu anhu recited Surah Maryam. Who was the one who asked? Who was the one who said, asked him about Isa? Amr ibn al-As. So Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu at that point wasn't a Muslim. He was one of the senior members of the Quraysh. And he was very close to Najashi. So politically he was very smart, very clever, very calculated, always 2-3 steps ahead. Before he went to Abyssinia, he gave gifts to the advisors of Najashi. And he said, whatever we decide, whatever I say, try and support me in the palace, in the courts. Try and support me, and then, that way, Najashi himself will be given encouragement to, agree with his advisors. And so, he sent gifts to the advisors of Najashi, planning ahead. And he also gave gifts to Najashi when he arrived in Abyssinia also. So, Amr ibn al-As, he wasn't a Muslim at the time. He eventually accepts Islam in the 8th year of the Hijrah, 2 years before the death of the Prophet ﷺ. And it's interesting, his Islam, during the day while everyone is sleeping, after Dhuhr, at the peak of the heat of the Arabian desert, he leaves with his bags, packing his bags, and he's about to go on his riding beast and make his way to Medina to make the Hijrah and to become a Muslim. And he bumps into Khalid ibn Walid. Khalid ibn Walid also has his bags packed. And none of them know what's going on. Like, they're not aware of each other. So Amr ibn al-As says to Khalid, "Where are you going?" And Khalid was also going to Medina. But Khalid didn't want to say, because it's supposed to be a secret. They're both trying to escape, essentially. They're both trying to leave without anybody finding out. So Khalid says to Amr, "Where are you going?" Like, "I'll tell you if you tell me." Because there's suspicion there. They don't trust each other. And so they both realize they're both going to Medina because they both want to become Muslim. And this is very interesting because both of these companions were known. One was known for his political knowledge, for his political abilities. Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, he became the governor. And by the way, he was also a skilled and experienced general. But Khalid ibn Walid, of course, militarily, one of the greatest military general in history, according to Western academia. Western experts, when it comes to military history, they speak about Khalid ibn Walid, the greatest general who ever lived. Never lost a battle, undefeated. And he fought the likes of the Romans and the Persians with limited resources and limited men. It's amazing when you read about his history and his life. So they both end up leaving together, and they both end up going to the Prophet ﷺ. And Khalid ibn Walid, radiallahu anhu, he goes to the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, I want to become Muslim on one condition. And he's asked, what is this condition? He says that I've done lots of bad deeds. I was fighting against you. I killed Muslims. And I want my previous sins to be forgiven. And to the Prophet ﷺ, he says to him, don't you know, O Khalid, Islam removes and erases whatever came before. And so he accepts Islam. And Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu comes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, O Messenger of Allah, I want to accept Islam, but on one condition. He says, what is this condition? He says, I want my previous sins to be forgiven. Same thing. And to the Prophet ﷺ, he says to him, don't you know, O Amr, that your previous sins are forgiven when you accept Islam? And so Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu accepts Islam. And it's interesting, the Prophet ﷺ says about him that the people accepted Islam and Amr ibn al-As amana. The Prophet says, people aslama, they accepted Islam, but Amr ibn al-As amana, he believed. Which is very interesting, the words he uses. And it could mean that Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, when he accepted Islam, as soon as he became Muslim, like he had Iman. Because of course, sometimes people enter into Islam, وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ. Iman has yet to enter into their heart. But with Amr ibn al-As, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, Aman. And he, of course, straight away, he made a huge difference. He was chosen to be the leader of the army, to be a general of one of the Muslim armies, almost like within a few months at least. And again, this shows us his abilities. straight away, at that stage, to be given such a huge responsibility, shows us the status of Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu. And there are narrations which speak about him. Somebody came and asked him, they said, is it not the case that if someone was loved by the Prophet ﷺ, then that person is a righteous person? Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu said, yes, that's the case. So they said, the Prophet ﷺ loved you, which means you're a righteous person. Amr ibn al-As, he shows humility. Why is he showing humility? What does he not say? I mean, what the person's saying makes sense. And what would a person normally say? We say, yeah, I guess that's what I just said. He says, the Prophet ﷺ, I don't know if the Prophet ﷺ loved me or if the Prophet ﷺ used me to be able to help as a means of isti'ana, as a means of being able to help when it comes to the Muslims and helping and aiding the Muslims. I don't know if it's because of love, or I don't know if it's because I was of some sort of use, I was some sort of help. So it's very interesting, his humility. How he responded to this comment about you must be a righteous person. And again, it shows us the importance of humility. Somebody comes and says, you're a good Muslim, you're a righteous Muslim. You say, yeah, I am a righteous Muslim. You're right. It's not from humility. A person needs to understand where he stands when it comes to his deen. Everyone needs to improve and do better as Muslims, and always realize that there's always somebody who's better, there's always somebody who's doing more, there's always somebody who's more knowledgeable. Also, the son of Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu. Anyone know who his son was? One of the great companions, one of the great worshippers of Allah. Anyone know his name? One of the Abdullahs. Abdullah ibn Amr. His name was Abdullah. There were a few Abdullahs amongst the companions. Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and you have Abdullah ibn Amr. Abdullah ibn Amr was known for his ibadah. And just to give us an idea of the ibadah and the piety of Abdullah ibn Amr radiallahu anhu, and also the tarbiyah of his father, Amr ibn al-As. Amr ibn al-As marries off his son to one of the great elite families of the Quraysh, after Islam. This is after he's become Muslim. And he goes to the house of his son, sees his daughter-in-law, his son's wife, and says, how are things? This is the day after, or not the day after, a few days later, maybe a few weeks later. And so she says, he's a good man, he's a righteous man, he prays all night and he fasts every day. So what's she saying? I'm not being given my time, my rights. So Amr ibn al-As is furious. And so he goes to the Prophet ﷺ and complains to the Prophet ﷺ. And he goes to his son and complains to his son, what are you doing? This isn't the way. This isn't the way that you deal with your family members. This isn't how you should be with your spouse. Your wife has rights, etc. And Amr ibn al-As understands this. And so he goes to the Prophet ﷺ also complaining to him. And so the Prophet ﷺ brings Abdullah ibn Amr and says, do you fast during the day? He says, yes. He says, do you pray during the night? Abdullah says, yes. The Prophet ﷺ says to him, I also fast, but I also eat. I pray during the night and I also sleep. Meaning, it's not just a case of worshipping non-stop all the time. As they say in Arabic, sa'a wa sa'a. Sa'a li rabbik wa sa'a li hubbik. An hour for your Lord and an hour for something else, for something you love. And another narration mentions about his son Abdullah ibn Amr, a great worshipper of Allah. He would fast every single day. And the Prophet ﷺ came to him and said to him, there's another narration which mentions, he said to him, don't fast every day. Fast 3 days a month. The middle days, Ayyam al-Bid, 13th, 14th and 15th. And Abdullah ibn Amr, he's fasting every day. So 3 days for him is Nothing. It's like this is from every day, you ask me to do 3 days, like it's like somebody going to the gym every day, you say to them, no, go to the gym just 3 days a month. That's enough. People go crazy, like, what do you mean? It's not enough. This is so much less now. So he says, oh Messenger of Allah, I can do more than this. Like 3 days a month, this is nothing. I can do much more. Give me more. And so he says, if you have to do more, then twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays, which is a sunnah. Again he said, this is not enough for me, I can do much more than this. And so he says, then fast, the fast of Dawood, the best of fasts, fast one day and eat the other day. Alternate. One day fast, one day break your fast, one day fast, one day eat. And so Abdullah ibn Amr, he would fast one day and he would eat one day. And he did this for the rest of his life, until he was old. And, subhanAllah, listen to this, when he was older, he said to the narrators, those who were narrating the hadith, he said, if only I had taken the concession of the Prophet ﷺ when I was younger. Like, if only I had taken it. What does he mean? It's easy to do an act of worship when you're younger, but then when you get older, it's a lot harder. And somebody who has such iman, and he wants to worship Allah continuously, it's very hard for some people to give up those things. SubhanAllah, we talk about giving up, bad habits, smoking and gossiping and watching things and doing haram things. We speak about giving up those things. For the righteous, it was difficult for them to give up good deeds, because they were so used to it. So he was alternating, fasting and then breaking his fast, fasting, breaking his fast, fasting, and eating the next day, etc. When he became old, he didn't want to stop, because he felt like he was lowering his ibadah for the sake of Allah. And so he continued. So he's saying when he's older, if only I had taken the advice of the Prophet ﷺ. He knew what was best for me. He was thinking long term, I wasn't thinking long term. But of course, this is the status of Abdullah ibn Amr radiallahu anhu, and Al-Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu was a great companion, and he was the one who conquered Iskandariya, Egypt, and he also conquered other parts of the Muslim world. Finally, we move on to the 36th year of the Hijrah. On the 15th of Jumada Al-Akhira, there was the controversial and the dark time in our history of Waq'atul Jamal, the battle of the camel, between Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu and Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, and those who were opposed to Ali ibn Abi Talib. And this was a conflict between the companions, where some were siding with Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan with regards to what decisions should have been made after the death of Uthman ibn Affan, after his assassination. And of course Ali ibn Abi Talib was in the right, and these were dark days. And what's important to understand is that this was the first time in history that Muslims were fighting one another physically. And this had never happened before. Of course, this was something which would continue up until Yawm al-Qiyamah, Muslims fighting one another. But that was the first time. But the conflict was never a case of somebody accusing somebody else of disbelief, or something related to their Islamic character, or their status of their iman, for example, or their connection or status in the sight of Allah. It was purely political, and those obviously had consequences, as we know, as a result of this conflict. But it was never to the extent where they would start to accuse each other of basically being disbelievers, or going to the extent of being sinners even though you had these two groups and these two sides, Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. And of course Ali ibn Abi Talib was the correct leader of the Muslims at the time. But when he was a leader, there was a lot of conflict and civil wars that took place. When Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu was assassinated eventually by some extreme groups, his son Al-Hasan became the leader. And his son stepped down after a few months. He stepped down for the sake of the betterment of the Muslims and the unity of the Muslims, and he basically said to Muawiyah, you can be the leader. If it means everyone's going to come together and the fighting is going to stop, then I'll step down. And again, this shows us the status of Al-Hasan ibn Ali radiallahu anhu, that he's thinking of the betterment of the Muslims. And this was actually predicted by the Prophet ﷺ himself. He spoke about his grandson and he said, "Inna ibni hada sayyid." Verily, this son of mine is going to be a leader. وَسَيُصْلِحُ بَيْنَ فِئَتَيْنِ عَظِيمَتَيْنِ. And he's going to reconcile between two Muslim groups. Meaning, the group of Ali ibn Abi Talib and the group of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. And this indeed took place in his lifetime. And of course, Ali ibn Abi Talib was the leader for a number of years. And then after that, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan became the leader after the death of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. And inshallah, we're going to conclude here. And these kinds of incidents should give us pause to reflect on our own lives and our own circumstances, take lessons from these incidents, and also to learn more about our own history as Muslims, inshallah. We'll conclude here. Any questions before we finish? Okay, Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha.
Yes, do have some questions. Sorry, I was downstairs listening to you. Yeah, questions, contributions, clarifications, I guess, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Barakallahu feek. Okay, Jazakallah khair for the speech, Sheikh. Very nice, and thanks for the comments as regards Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As. They were very nice, and they touched something in me, so that was a very nice presentation on that account. If I can remember, I had 4. Okay, first of all, just to clarify the months were always there in the Arabic history. But as you said, they moved them around, and Allah, in that last year of the prophethood, basically they became ordered. Their order was there, so the months of the calendar were always there, but as you say, the start, when should we start the calendar, the year, etc. Just to clarify that more from, rather than they introduced the months themselves, they were already there. The battle you referred to at the end, I'm not sure if I heard it right, or I fell asleep or what. Could you just remind me the name of the battle with Muawiyah and Ali radiallahu anhu?
Yeah, Battle of the Camel.
Battle of the Camel. I thought that was with Aisha, and Siffin was Muawiyah.
Yeah, sorry, my mistake. Yeah, Battle of the Camel, Waqat al-Jamal, between Ali and Aisha, you're right. Sorry, my mistake.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
So the Battle of the Camel was between Ali ibn Abi Talib and Aisha radiallahu anha. Some of the companions sided with her. She disagreed with Ali ibn Abi Talib, and so she had some companions who were with her. She actually went out with them. It's called Waqat al-Jamal, Battle of the Camel, because she actually went out with the army to show her support politically. Because if she goes out along with the Muslims, people will realize, okay, she's actually showing her support to those Muslims who are not in agreement with Ali ibn Abi Talib, and so it's it that she went out. There are some narrations which mention as well that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that she would be in an army which would be opposing the Muslims. There's a narration which mentions something about Aisha radiallahu anha hearing the way the barking of dogs or the howling of dogs as a sign of a mistake that she was going to make. And later on she actually mentions that she regrets going out and facing Ali ibn Abi Talib and opposing Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. And the battle was won by Ali ibn Abi Talib, and then he escorted Aisha radiallahu anha back to the city of Medina. And again, it shows us the respect that Ali radiallahu anha had for Aisha radiallahu anha. Yeah. So for that.
And so Siffin, just to clarify, so Siffin was the battle.
Siffin was with Muawiyah. Yeah.
Okay.
Battle of the Camel was with Aisha. She didn't obviously participate in the battle, but she was.
Yeah. And this is just more. It's something I haven't really studied this, but it's something I've been hearing recently. When Amr conquered Misr or Egypt, it was for start that was the city that was conquered. Now I don't know the order of the conquerings and things, but to say Alexandria, I can't pronounce the Arabic word of it, but Alexandria wasn't the main city, it was for start, and so when he conquered that was the conquering of Egypt. If you can clarify that.
Okay, I'm not fully aware of the sequence of how the land was conquered.
Sure. And lastly, it's kind of a contribution, I think. You mentioned nicely the story of Khalid and Amar's conversion. They were 2 of 3. You omitted the third one, but there's a third companion. They're regarded as the last before the conquest of Mecca, so the last of the Muhajirun. Do you know, for the benefit of anyone, the third one?
I'm not aware, no.
Okay, if I've got his name right, I can certainly describe him, but it's Uthman ibn Talha, the keeper of the key of the Kaaba. The three of them met each other, as he say,
So it was-
you
it was three of them.
illustrated the story, but he's the third one from that group.
Okay.
Just a little contribution. Please do, you know, this is,
exactly.
I've had this in my mind
Yeah.
for some time, and it's nice, because in the last 2 weeks or so I've heard this story, but it's just these
Okay.
two.
No,
So what about the third?
Yeah. Okay, no, جزاك الله خير. وفهم طلحة. Okay. جزاك الله خير.
Well, thanks so much for listening, Sheikh, and entertaining, and you know, taking my questions and things. Barakallahu feekum. And thank you for putting up with me.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just one question. You know, you said like with the months, they moved the months around and things like that after the Prophet ﷺ. So how are they certain they got like the day of Arafah right and even Ramadan right and the right sequence? You know, how are they?
So they would have the months.
Yeah.
The sequence of the months. The months would be swapped over, but they would be aware of what month it actually was originally. And also in the Quran, Allah mentions that the months with Allah are 12 شهرا في كتاب الله يوم خلق الله السماوات والأرض, that there are 12 months in the book of Allah from the day when He created the heavens and the earth. So you could assume that it was reset in the time of the Prophet ﷺ.
Can we say the battle that you had companions had? Can you say who was right or who was wrong?
Well, the leader of the Muslims was Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. And we say that, of course, they're all companions and they all make mistakes. No one's perfect. But from what I know, we know that Ali ibn Abi Talib was the one who was correct. Allah knows best.
Closer to the truth.
Yeah.
There's a hadith that says he was closer to the truth.
Yeah.
Three
Yeah.
parties, weren't there? There was a
Yeah,
group
so
that
you could say
abstained.
closer to the truth.
Yeah.
That would be more appropriate when it comes to the companions radiallahu anhu ajma'in. And they're all companions, they all make mistakes. So we don't go to one extreme or the other with the companions radiallahu anhu. جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.